Did you know that 95% of critical illness insurance claims get approved on average? That's an overwhelming majority, yet many people still remain unprotected. In today's episode of the Money Mindset podcast, hosts Jim and Ryan uncover the crucial role of critical illness insurance in safeguarding your health and financial stability. Stay tuned as we delve into real-life stories, expert insights, and actionable advice to ensure you and your loved ones are well prepared for the unexpected.
Wake up, it's time to rise. Talking money with sharp insight. Jim and Ryan here to guide. Mastering the money ride. Saving stacks and planning dreams. Living large by honest means. Tune in now for the schemes. Breaking down financial themes. Money Mindset every day.
Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Money Mindset Mastery podcast. I'm your host, Jim, and joining me today, as always, is my co-host, Ryan Genoe. Ryan, how are things today?
Beautiful cold day outside and building snow forts. So it's a cold afternoon. So
yeah, I personally wouldn't use beautiful in front of cold, unless it's a beautifully cold beer, right?
Absolutely. So my apologies.
Yeah, no worries. To each their own. So today we are talking about, I guess, my critical illness journey and the life-saving benefits of critical illness insurance. Now, I've talked about this story a couple of times before in my episodes. Actually, it's the reason why I launched the podcast, was to talk about my open heart surgery that I had back in 2019. Now, we did have a follow-up last year because we reached the 5-year mark. What we really didn't dive into too much, as we kind of touched on it, is the role that critical illness had in terms of my recovery. And we also have some stats that we're going to go through. These are specifically Canadian stats that we're going to go through as it relates to dealing with critical illnesses, the actual percentage of payouts on a critical illness policy here for Canadians, and the type of illnesses that you should be concerned about and when you could expect to potentially develop one of these. So we're going to go through those stats today. But yeah, I think we're going to dive in a little bit more into, again, my story, but then talk about critical illness and how I think it ultimately allowed me to successfully fully recover and continue on living a healthy and enjoyable life. So let's get going, Ryan.
Yeah, I think, this is about understanding your story, and really the podcast that we did last year about kind of reflecting on 5 years had a huge following, and lots of people had lots of questions. And again, we wanted to come back and kind of tell the behind the scenes stuff of how critical illness works, because nobody really understands. And I think that's where some advisors kind of, fail to really advise their clients is, here's something that they're able to provide an option for people. Because as you said, and as we'll go through this and just talking about your experience through critical illness, is it has a really impact on your mental health and financial and all these things. And here's an option that people are given. And that's really what we want to do today. I guess part of that, interviewing is really interviewing you again, Jim. So, and just walking through that kind of unexpected diagnosis for you of a severe heart condition back in 2019. Like what sparked you to do that for yourself? And then also we'll walk through a little bit of the impact that it had for you and your family.
So I think it was my spidey senses that basically kind of put me on this journey, because at the time I was still very active. I was cycling, mountain biking, doing a lot of activities, going to the gym and swimming and whatever else. Felt great. Didn't have any problems. However, there was some family history. So my father, at age, I believe he was 42, 43, had a heart attack. I wouldn't say it was unexpected, because he was a heavy smoker and didn't take care of himself in terms of the food that he ate. He was very healthy physically, externally, but internally had no idea. So he had a heart attack. And it was due to a condition that we have where we have a significantly elevated cholesterol. I'm not talking just like slightly elevated. We're talking like sludge in the blood, elevated levels, and no amount of diet or exercise could bring it down to a healthy level. So we definitely required medical or medicine intervention. So as a result of that, in my early 30s, I just started to be proactive and went to my family doctor who had referred me to my to a cardiologist. Just every 2 years, go and do a stress test. And so from my early 30s, I was taking baby aspirin and things of that nature, and I was started to take statin drugs. But even with the statin drugs and the exercise and the diet, I still wasn't really near the safe levels that I should have been in terms of my cholesterol. So every 2 years, I'd go see the cardiologist. I'd do my regular stress test and cardio echogram. I believe that's what it's called. And every 2 years, the doctor would be like, "Yeah, everything's normal. Blood pressure's good. ECG's good. Everything looks fine. I'll see you in a couple of years." Back in 20, so this was October of 2018. Went through my usual routine with my cardiologist. He gave me the same answer, see you in a couple of years. But for whatever reason, at that moment in time, I just thought to myself, I'd like for him to go in and visually take a look, as opposed to just kind of relying on some of these tests. He refused. The reason why he refused, I don't blame him, is because there was no blip, no red flags, like nothing. Everything was looked as if I was a healthy, at the time, 46-year-old male. With my insistence, he finally agreed to go through the angiogram, and lo and behold, I had 5 blockages in 3 of my arteries. I had the widowmaker, and I was literally a few months away from going to bed and not waking up again. So I went from "you're healthy, there's nothing to worry about" to "oh my goodness, you need emergency heart surgery, open heart surgery." And that's what happened. I found out on a Tuesday morning at 8:30, and Wednesday the next day I was in St. Michael's Hospital, dealing with and facing open heart surgery.
So going through that is the emotional impact, obviously, from your family, and also the financial impact. And again, as we cover and help people understand more about what critical illness is, emotionally, I guess, huge for your family to go through and learn that, one, they may not have had their father with them anymore, or husband for that matter. And I think for critical illness, it's about the aftermath. It's okay, now we've gotten through something. Again, the major ones: stroke, heart attack, cancer, and my brain is stopping on the fourth one, which are the 4 major ones. Jim, remind me again. Fourth one.
Which was the bypass surgery, which is what I had.
There we go. So one of 4 major things. Can you talk about what the impact could have been without critical illness? And I think that's the biggest thing that people don't realize when understanding what critical illness coverage, or I guess a health warranty really on your own life, is, if you didn't have that in place.
Yeah, I mean, even before that, if I kind of want to talk a little bit about what my fears were. The obvious one people would say is not surviving. And that actually wasn't a fear of mine. And the reason for that is I've had different types of surgeries, hip replaced and knee surgeries and whatever else. And the question I always ask is, what's your success rate? So fortunately, the one that my heart surgeon had a 98% success rate. So that wasn't actually my number one fear. I'd say my number one fear was financial, right? Because at the time I was told that I would have to not work for anywhere from 6 to 12 months. And I know with a lot of people, they say, well, you don't have a physical job, which is true. But what I didn't know, and you find these things out when you're dealing with them, right? What I didn't know was that in the first 12 months after having the surgery that I had, there was about a 36% chance that I would either have a heart attack or stroke and die. So they said the number one thing I had to avoid during recovery was stress. So they said to me, If opening up an email for your business or taking on a phone call or even trying to do an appointment, if that's going to elevate your stress level, it could trigger a stroke or a heart attack. So they said absolutely for me to maximize my recovery and have the best chance of getting through my first 12 months without having a heart attack or stroke, I had to eliminate stress. Now, that's not easy to do, right? So, naturally, for me being self employed, being a business owner, the thought of not working for 6 to 12 months, that was a number one concern of mine. However, one of the first things I did when I got home from finding out I was going in the next day for the surgery, I pulled all my insurance policies, my wills, my powers of attorneys, all that stuff, right? And the one thing that I looked at was I knew how much life insurance I had, and I knew what would be paid out if I didn't survive the surgery. But was I what I wasn't sure of at the time, even though I sold the product and I had for many, many years, because again, there's many, many conditions that are covered in these policies. If what I was dealing with was a covered condition, and I have to tell you, it was mixed emotions when I saw the amount that I had and that I would qualify for the benefit once I passed the 30-day survival rate. What I mean by mixed emotions was, man, was I happy that I had the coverage, but man, was I disappointed that I didn't buy more. That's the reality of it, right? But what I did know going into the surgery, one of the things I didn't have to worry about was my family's and my business's financial situation, because there was enough money there for my bills to be paid for my business. So all of my salaries that I'm responsible for, my monthly obligations like leases and rents and mortgages and whatever else, that was all going to be taken care of. And also on my personal side, same thing. Didn't have to worry about feeding my family, paying the mortgage, paying my obligations. Now, if I didn't have critical illness insurance, could I have met those obligations? Sure, but that would have meant either refinancing a bunch of equity or even liquidating a bunch of my investments that were intended for my retirement, right? I didn't have to do any of that. Those still stayed in place. So, in many respects, critical illness is also considered an asset protector, because instead of having to dip into your own assets to fund some of these unexpected medical events, critical illness insurance does that for you. And the payout is tax free. So we'll get in a little more detail on the actual product itself. So I literally, Ryan, was able to spend, I ended up going to work after about 5 months after my recovery, with the blessing of my cardiologist, obviously. He basically said, listen, start off, one meeting, see what you can get through. And it did still take a little bit, like I couldn't ramp up all the way to my usual levels. It did take me a while to kind of get back to my levels that I was at before, because my energy levels were still very, very low as a result of the recovery, right? But for 4 months, all I had to worry about was getting better, doing whatever exercise I had to do, going to whatever medical appointments I had to go to. Of course, there was cardio physiotherapy that I had to deal with as well. I didn't have to worry about finances, which is different than what my dad had to go through. So my father, when he had his heart attack in, I believe it was early 90s, there was no critical illness in Canada at the time, so he didn't have that. He was an old Italian man, didn't really believe in insurance, worked in construction, had a union, but the union at times had disability coverage, at times they didn't have disability coverage. So when he had his heart attack, and it was a massive heart attack, it caused damage to his heart, he had to go back to work after 6 weeks, and he never fully recovered from that. The reason why he had to go back to work after 6 weeks was there was no money to come in to pay the bills. So he didn't fully recover, which ultimately ended up causing other heart problems for him. He ended up having multiple bypasses, pacemaker, a bunch of stuff, right? And I attribute it to him not being able to actually spend the quality time to fully recover from his initial heart attack, and he couldn't do that because he didn't have the resources to help pay the family obligations and the family bills. So critical illness for sure allowed me to fully recover without any stress, without any issues, knowing that financially everything was taken care of.
Yeah. Now, I guess we'll dive into a little bit of the role that critical illness really did play and what made you come up with the decision, make the decision, take out critical illness in the first place, years long before you even were diagnosed.
Yeah, I bought the critical illness coverage in 2009, which was the year that my second child, Liam, was born. And really, I looked at it as being self-employed, having this family history, which was only in my dad, but we didn't really think it was hereditary at the time, only because again we thought his heart attack was a result of stress, the smoking. He would smoke 1 to 2 packs a day, you know, ate salami and cheese every single day with Italian white bread, and now I'm getting hungry. Um, but he didn't take care of himself, right? So that's what we attributed to him having the heart attack. Later on, we did find out there was a hereditary disorder that we have in our liver that over creates the cholesterol. But I just felt I have 2 young children. The decision we made with Carol, when we got married, she had a career, but one of our family goals was if she could stay home and raise our kids, that would be ideal. So again, I was the only income earner in our family at the time. So my legitimate concern was if I did develop, any one of these conditions that were covered, how could my family get through that situation? And also, again, remembering my dad and his struggles and how quickly he had to go back to work because of the financial situation. I didn't want to have to go through that. Right? So that was what prompted me to purchase the critical illness policy.
Now, you said that it wasn't until you were diagnosed that you started sifting through your policies and really tried to understand. So, what were some more initial thoughts as you went through the process of being like, do I really need critical illness? And once you pulled the policies, like obviously you touched a little bit upon it, of that thought and understanding, but like, what is it that people might be missing when it comes to the understanding of their policy, if they have one in place, or that they've never heard of critical illness, or CI as it's sometimes referred to? Any thoughts?
Well, I think in my case, in your case, it's a little bit different, a little more unique because we're in the industry. So we see the stats. We see how critical illness plays out and benefits people. So it wasn't so much at the time me thinking, do I really need this? Should I have it? It was more of, it's a product that I offer. I encourage others to buy it for protection. I should probably have
Yeah.
some for myself, right?
Yeah.
So that was really why I ended up getting critical illness insurance. Now, the problem is, and again, we're in the industry, so it's difficult sometimes to follow through with what we recommend with our clients when it comes to our own stuff because it's all we deal with all day long, right? So we do reviews with our clients and their plans and their insurances and whatever else. I would say we're probably not as good at doing those reviews on ourselves, right? Since then, for sure, I do now, right? But prior to, not really. So it was one of those things where I bought it. I knew that I had it and hoped that I never had to claim on it. But then when I did pull it, and here's the thing, I did know with certainty that if I had a heart attack or if I had a stroke or if I had cancer that there would be coverage. What I didn't remember was if bypass surgery was covered. And again, when I went through the list, and at the time, I believe there was like 21 or 22 covered conditions. Now, many of them are about 24 to 26, some at 27. But when I went down the list and I saw, this is covered, it was great. There was a sense of relief for sure. What I will also say is I had never processed a claim on a critical illness policy up until that point. I did process life insurance claims throughout the years, but the very first claim on a critical illness policy was on myself. So I was able to actually walk myself through the claims process, which was fantastic, right? Like about a week or two, probably 2 weeks after I came home from the hospital from having the surgery, I was well enough to call the insurance company. I'm not going to name insurance companies, but it was one of the larger reputable ones, and called the claims department, explained to them the situation, and there is a 30-day waiting period. What that means is from the day of diagnosis. So my diagnosis was technically the day of my surgery. I had to wait 30 days in order to receive the benefit. I had to survive the 30 days to receive the benefit. So they had said to me, "Here's what you need to do: submit the claims. We need the doctor's report as well." And thankfully, I had everything. And they said they'll do a review of the claim, and if approved, even if it was approved before the 30-day, then on day 31, money would be in my bank account. And sure enough, they approved everything. I remember the Friday, it was like 4:30. I get the email from the underwriter, claim approved. So that was a huge sense of relief, right? Knowing for sure that I was getting this money. And Monday, the money was in my bank account. So it was a very easy process. I'd say the underwriting was probably more difficult than the actual claim on the policy.
Yeah. And I would say for a lot of people to know too, the critical illness is probably one of the more difficult insurances to get underwriting for, because there are so many stipulations that come across. And that's why, again, buying insurance early, people often wait until they absolutely need insurance, but often it's too late. And I know we've said that to a lot of people before. And unfortunately, I know we're supposed to share stories a little bit later, but I would say my only two claims for critical illness, unfortunately, had to be for kids. Thankfully, they had this coverage that helped those two families really get through some really difficult times and provide the right help and support they needed for not only themselves, as you said, for a mother or a father to be able to take the time off work and not have to worry about that, to be with their child. I have critical illness for myself. I have it also for my son Walker, to make sure that if they needed the best drug, that at least we're not sacrificing everything. I'm getting this lump sum amount, tax free, that is able to help provide for that. And the heartache is knowing that there's people that I haven't worked with that have the same stories, that have never had the critical illness, and seeing what it does to people. And that's why it's so important for us to talk about this on this episode, is the importance of just asking questions and coming to us and talking about, is critical illness right for you? I would say it's probably just as important as life insurance, especially for younger people, younger families, because there's a lot that you're putting to sacrifice. So obviously, it leads into the kind of the lifeline that this kind of can provide for people, this lump sum payment. What other things did it provide for you going through your open heart surgery to help alleviate not only not having to worry about the bills? Was there anything else that maybe insurance didn't cover or healthcare system didn't cover that may have provided help and support for you?
Well, I think people don't realize this. They believe that here in Ontario, that our healthcare system is free. Now, it's not free. We pay for it through taxes, so it's not free. It's just we don't get a bill at the end of the month to say this is what it costs you for our services to bring you back up to care. But there are certain things that are not covered. So things like, for example, my family came down. Like I was in the hospital for 5 or 6 days, right? Well, St. Mike's Hospital, downtown Toronto. Family comes down. They have to worry about paying for transit or even parking. So that's about $35 a day. While I was there, 5 days, you want to be somewhat entertained. So you rent a TV. And I forget that. I think that was like $15 a day. Is that necessity? No. But when you're there for 5 days straight, you go nuts, because the other thing too is, with my surgery, it wasn't something that I could just get up and start walking around to kind of keep myself busy. I was bedridden for a big part of it, right? You want things like the telephone, so your family has access to you. You can bring your own cell phone. Unfortunately, there's too many thefts that are happening, and people were losing their, you know, their tablets and their phones are getting stolen sometimes while you're sleeping during the middle of the day, right? Food. So if your family's coming down to visit, my wife and two kids, they have to eat something when they're there. So these are expenses that add up. And again, there's a travel time. Like we live an hour outside of the city, so it's not like they were fairly close. So these are expenses that do add up over time, right? So I was able to cover some of those expenses. Um, Part of the from a mental health point of view, I was able to take them on a nice vacation in Mont Tremblant. Right? Again, I could have paid for it out of pocket, but why? I had money from the critical illness policy, which allowed me to take them, and for us to just dealing with a very scary emotional situation. It was just nice to get away for, I think it was like 5 days. We stayed at a nice place. We didn't want to have to drive everywhere. It was expensive, but that was okay because I had money from critical illness to cover that, right? Um, and for others, like not necessarily myself, but for others, for example, if you had some kind of cancer or diagnosis, and you didn't want to wait 6 months for an MRI or get treatment, you receive that money, you can go across the border, get help right away. You have the money to do it. It's money in hand, right? So that's what it does for you as well. If I had people from out of the country that wanted to see me, for example, like there are people that have family that are not living in the same country, you can fly your parent, your brother, whoever it is, and pay for it. They don't have to worry about it. It just gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom to be able to do these things without having to think about it. You just know the money's there to do it.
The last stat that I read about Canadian coverage was that almost half of the drugs for cancer aren't covered under our OHIP system. So it's, again, big call out. So, when people are deciding whether critical illness is for you, again, I look at family history, you did too, of making the decision of whether it was right for me and right for my son and the next generation too. And making sure that we had the right things in place. And you talked about it a lot, is like you want to bring the people that are going to help take care of you. You're going to surround yourself by people that are going to help you heal and take the stress away. The same the families that I talked about, the exact same thing they did after everything kind of subsided and everybody was back on track and healthy, is they took a family vacation and created that beautiful experience for themselves and their family, because of, it's not just a stress on you, but it's the stress on the closest around you to get through it. And I think that's just a way to help ease back into kind of regular day to day. So I think looking at kind of your overall personal reflection about your experience and the emotional support that you had coming into it, what was the role of the friends and family that did? And you touch upon it, but I think digging deeper as to what the importance of having family or certain friends around during that recovery piece.
Yeah, I mean, family's medicine, right? First of all, if I look at my immediate, like my wife Carol and my two kids, um, Liam and Serena, like I fought to live for them. So they gave me the will to just keep fighting through it and making sure that, again, I had the best options to fully recover from this, because I wanted to be there for them. They were still young at the time, so their love was amazing. But my mom, like I felt sorry for my mom, because as a father, if my child was going through that, it would break my heart. So I felt that for my mother, right? Knowing that her oldest, her firstborn, was dealing with this situation. Like I can't imagine what she had gone through. right? But she was there to support as best she could. I mean, my mom, she makes this chicken noodle soup that I swear could cure cancer. Like it's just, it's amazing,
Mhm.
So whatever I wanted, she would make, and there's nothing better than mom's cooking. Um,
Yeah.
my family, like my siblings, I've always been someone who is like I don't ask for help. I've never I don't like asking people for help. And when people say, "Hey, do you want me to be there for you?" Like for me, my kind of knee jerk reaction is, "No, no, no. Like don't worry, I'll deal with it myself." Try keeping my brother and sister away from being at the hospital. Like forget it, right? So even though like my sister lives in Bolton, my brother he lives closer to me, which is nice. So he actually took me to the hospital the evening that I had to get admitted to the hospital for the surgery. And then he stepped in because Carol isn't really good at driving in the city. My mom wouldn't be able to get herself to the hospital. So my brother took on that role and responsibility to drive them down to the hospital the day of the surgery, get them home safely. My sister, she wanted to come down the next day from Bolton to visit me. I'm like, yeah, don't worry, it's not necessary. Well, good luck keeping her away, right? She was there with my brother-in-law, and I have to say, like, I appreciated that. It was it was very healing to have the people that are most important to you to be there. I didn't have to try to stay awake. Like they knew, they understood the situation. Just them being there made all the difference in the world. Um, so I get emotional when I think about it because it meant so much to me that they were there. Because I would also do this. Like, forget if my sister said to me, if she was in the hospital, "Don't come and see me." Like, don't worry, it's okay. Like, yeah, good luck, right? I'm getting there. So that was all very important to me, obviously, and my friends, my business partners. It was funny because I guess my partner John didn't realize that Monday I was actually going home. So I had my surgery on the Wednesday. The Monday I was going home, literally as I'm putting on my shoes, or Carol's helping me put on my shoes, he walks in with Carter, right? And I was shocked that they were there. And I'm like, actually, I'm going home now. So they're like, oh, okay. Like stayed 5 minutes, and then they left and I went home, and that was nice. And then one of the things that really touched me was, Carol was receiving email messages, text messages, voicemail messages from clients and friends and family, and she would say to me like, you have a lot of messages. Like you tell me when you're ready to for me to read them to you, right? And it took a couple of weeks because I was in and out of sleep because I was very groggy and tired. But just the amount of outreach from family and friends, and clients, it was very touching. Like it moved me. It really did. So that was obviously very important to have that.
Yeah. And it really, all of this, allowed you to focus on what truly mattered, right? The family, your recovery, and they all came to your aid during this. And you touched upon it already. I'm going to refocus of making sure that people understand taking the stress and ease away of that income replacement, of knowing that all the things that you would normally worry about when you're off on these things, about getting back to work, about making sure the grass was cut, or making sure that certain family members were here. And again, your responsibility is different. Again, just like me, we're business owners, and making sure all those things of the people that work with us were taken care of, that our kids were able to go on their day to day and not have to worry about any of these things that, especially us as parents, we take on as part of it. And I'm going to just say the insurance payout for that was really helpful in making sure that that you're replacing that potential lost income and not sacrificing your future retirement at the same time. And again, if anybody says that that's not going to cause stress for you as you're trying to recover, but to know that you have that the standard of living is not changing for you, can really speak wonders. So, is there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Well, you mentioned the grass cutting. 'Cause it's so funny you said that. It just kind of triggered like my anxiety because I live on an acre property, and my lawn, Liam was too young and Serena were too young for them to mow the lawn. We have a riding lawnmower, and Carol doesn't know how to use a riding lawnmower, and that would have been a lot of stress for her. And it takes about an hour and a half to mow the lawn and to trim it and whatever else. And this was right after the May 2-4 weekend, right? So I had months of lawn mowing in front of me, and I wasn't allowed to mow the lawn. I literally was told, because essentially they sawed right through my breastbone, and needed to heal. They said you cannot be on a riding lawnmower for 6 months because of holding onto the steering wheel, the vibration, right? And if you fall, you're in big trouble. So right away, I thought to myself, well, I'm gonna basically have a jungle, right? Like, how am I going to deal with that? I had my neighbor who was in his 60s. He's like, Jim, I can do your lawn for you, but he's got an acre himself to deal with, right? And I didn't want to, put him through that. My neighbor up the street, same thing. He's like, Jim, I'd be more than happy to come down and do that for you. Again, he has an acre as well. Like, I didn't want to add that burden to anybody else. My brother offered as well, but he has a young family, and so I didn't want to put that burden on anybody else. So I called a lawn service company, and they dealt with it, right? And it was nice. Like, it's expensive. Like, they charge per cut when you're dealing with an acre of property. Like, there was a couple of months where it was like over $1,000 just to get my lawn mowed, because they had to come, 4 or 5 times in a month. But knowing that I had the money to take care of that, didn't have to worry about it, right? It wasn't coming out of my pocket. It was funded by the critical illness. So yeah, that took a lot of stress over that one little thing, right? These are things you don't think about. I couldn't sit in the front seat of the car for, it was like 3 weeks. And most people might ask the question, well, what's the big deal? I thought, what's the big deal? And then when the surgeon said to me, well, if you get even into a minor bumper to bumper accident, nothing major, and it deploys that airbag, the fact that your breastbone isn't fully healed, that impact will kill you, because it'll just collapse into the heart, right? I'm like, never thought about that, right? So I had to get clearance on when I could sit in the front seat. And it took about 3 weeks or so before getting that clearance. I couldn't drive for a period of time. Like, there was all these little things you don't really think about. Again, riding lawnmower, I thought, well, what's the big deal? Well, that constant vibration, right? And if you fall over and you're not fully healed, again, you're toast, right? So these are things people don't think about when you're dealing with things like going on dialysis, going on chemo, right? Like, those are things that they wipe you out from an energy point of view. So that's really what critical illness allowed me to do, is just to be able to cover all these expenses, and again, fully recover from it. So I think we might want to start talking a little bit more detailed about critical illness and start talking about stats, because here's a couple of things that clients usually comment to me, and I'm sure the same with you when we make the recommendation. Well, I'm going to pay for it. I'm fairly healthy, and I'll probably never claim on it, and it'll just be a waste of money. Well, you know what? There's an option there where you can actually structure the contract where, if you never claim on it, so some policies will allow you to do this in year 15. You can structure it where it's to age 65 or age 75, where if you never claimed on it, you're guaranteed to get all of your money back. So that's a feature we can add on to a policy. You can't get
I
that
think,
in car insurance.
well, and exactly, I think that's the best way for people to truly understand. Imagine driving 20 or 25 years, car, never having an accident, and your auto insurance company decides, hey, clean driving record, here's all your premiums back that you paid into it. And like, that's unheard of, right? That's a great business plan potentially for auto insurance for anybody listening. The amount of premiums you pay into that, and knowing that you can go a clean driving record. So, and that's the thing with critical illness. It can pay if, God forbid, something happens to you. And as we'll share some of the numbers, ask yourself as you're listening to this, do you have somebody in your family or a close person that you've heard of that has had cancer, a stroke, a heart attack, bypass surgery? and those are just like the major ones, right? And we won't go
Multiple
into
sclerosis is in there, right? MS,
the
Parkinson's,
MS. Yep.
um, early onset diabetes. There's potential for partial payout. Like there's so many illnesses that are covered. I had, the old story. I had a client years ago who I recommended critical illness insurance, and she decided not to buy it because she felt it was too expensive, and she was healthy and didn't need it. 6 months later, I got the call. Jim, did I ever buy that policy? No. Why didn't I buy it? Well, because you said it was too expensive. Thankfully, I had everything recorded, right? She's like, how much was the amount that you proposed? And I told her 140,000. And I finally asked her, I said, why are you asking me these questions? She's like, I was just diagnosed with MS. Would I have been able to claim on that policy? I'm like, yes, you would have, right? But with all the efforts that I put into trying to get her to purchase it, she just thought that she didn't need it. She was healthy, and 6 months later, that happened. That's not the only time. I've had other circumstances where, again, client says, nope, don't need it. 6 months later, heart attack, right? Where they could have claimed on these policies. So we do our best to recommend and encourage people to show them the impact of not having it, right? But, at the end of the day, the client is making the ultimate decision, because we all have the sense of that'll never happen to me until it does. I mean, I didn't think I would ever have open heart surgery, and then it happened,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But thankfully, I had the product because I felt that it was important, and it's something that I offer clients, right? So,
And and unlike life insurance too, is critical illness is about the survival, and we're surviving these things, the heart attacks, the cancer, but it's the recovery piece that people don't take in consideration. That's why it's important for people to really listen to some of the stats, or do some education for themselves as to any of these critical illnesses. Do you have them in your family, or anybody around you has experienced that? And asking or finding out what was the heartache, and what was the recovery time, and what was the impact on them, and what could have changed a lot of these things. And often, and again, unfortunately, somebody that I didn't have a client at the time, but I knew, whose child, again, unfortunately, I run into the child ones, is the child didn't have it and experienced one of these things, and they didn't have, and the impact that it was on the recovery and for the family and the dynamic. And if you're a business owner like us, having to stop our business and put aside, because I'm going to drop everything to make sure that my son's getting everything he needs for whatever treatment it is that it is. So
yeah. And going back to the origination of critical illness, it was a doctor, I believe in Australia, that invented the product. And I think he was a heart doctor specifically as well. And what he was finding was a lot of his patients were not successfully recovering. And he was trying to figure out the correlation between that and what was potentially causing them to not fully recover. And it was the financial stress, right? And then once the product was created and that stress was removed from the equation, the recovery rate increased. And that's how critical illness originally started. So it's proven that removing that element of stress gives you the best shot at recovering and living longer, which I believe that's what most people want, right? So let's talk a little bit about in terms of the average claim. So again, people thinking this will never happen to me. So the average age of claimants for critical illness insurance, this is in Canada. It varies slightly between men and women. So for men, the average is about 54. So around 54 is the average age that someone will be claiming on critical illness for men. Women is actually 49. So they're a little bit younger. And this is why critical illness insurance tends to be a little bit more costly for women than it is for men, because they're typically being diagnosed at a much younger age. So then I might have someone ask, well, then why don't I wait till I'm 45 to buy the policy if there's a chance that, I might get claim on this at age 54, for example. Well, the older you are when you enter these contracts, the more expensive it does become. So you're better off getting into it when you're younger because it's going to be less costly, specifically if you structure it in such a way that if you never claim on it, you're guaranteed to get all your money back. Right. So these are the Canadian statistics. Now, we talked a little bit about the most common types of critical illness that are claimed. So typically, again, the covered illnesses are about 24 to 26: cancer, heart attack, stroke, and then the one that I had was coronary artery bypass surgery. And I actually think this is more of a recent result because for many, many years, 82% of the claims was cancer, heart attack, and stroke. This coronary artery bypass surgery, so this is bypass surgery, seems to be something that's a little more recent now. That's really kind of coming into the forefront. So those are the four major reasons behind a claim. Let me just see here. Yeah, so it says here about 26 different covered conditions. Now, here's another one that I love because a lot of people, their response is the insurance companies will just love taking my money and they'll never pay it out. They'll find a reason to not pay it out, right? Ryan, can you see what the actual claim payout ratio is?
Between 90 and 95% paid out rate. And I know from experience of talking with a lot of the different insurance providers, and again, we're talking Canada. Again, people will often talk about the US, which is a very different than the Canadian because we have different laws in place that help hold them accountable. Between 90 and 95, and out of that like 5% remaining, often that is broken up of two factors that people keep in mind. One, that's not included is the factor that they haven't paid out yet because they're still going through the claiming process. That makes up a portion of it. And the other portion is that somebody just straight out lied about the information that they provided to the insurance company. So again, as we advise anybody going through an underwriting process, you never lie about any of the information that you're providing. Be truthful, right? So, and that makes up whatever the other percentage that hasn't paid out quite yet. So, and it's usually a pretty large percentage that is on the still in processing piece when they take that data.
Yeah, so to kind of simplify it, for every 100 claims, 95 of them get approved on average. The 5 that don't get approved is either because someone didn't disclose a condition that would have voided their contract anyway, right? Or they're not within the waiting period, meaning if you had a 30-day waiting period, you pass away 2 weeks before that waiting period, well, there's no payout, right? Unless you add a death benefit rider on top of that, right? So that's high. Like that's a really strong claims payout ratio, right? So for those of you who think insurance companies don't like to pay, when it comes to critical illness insurance, they pay, right? 95% of the time. In terms of the amount of policies or how many Canadians might have a critical illness policy, right now we're showing that that is about 10 million Canadians. So we're still very short because we're what population of about 40 million. So
40
there's
41.
Yeah, so there's still room for a lot more people to consider purchasing critical illness insurance. Now, if we look at the recovery rates, if I go through this, the recovery rate for Canadians with critical illness insurance can be influenced by several factors, including the financial support provided by the insurance. So again, we've been talking about this, right? It's really the support that can help cover your medical expenses, allowing for better access to treatment and reducing financial stress. The other thing that I was able to do with the money that I had was I was able to put in an in-home gym because one of the things at the time was recovery. They said resistance training and cardio, right? So I was able to do that. Eventually, I needed to get out of the house, so I was able to get a gym membership as well, so I can go swimming and do those things. But it contributed to me being able to do those things. What else are we looking at here? Survival rates. So the 1-year mortality rate for Canadians who suffer from a critical illness can vary significantly depending on the specific illness. So if we look at cancer, for example, so that's what a 90% I guess it all depends, right? So it's I'm just trying to read through this. Survival rate for breast cancer is around 90%. However, lung cancer is about 40%, right? Um, if you have a heart attack, there's an 80 to 90% survival rate. That's actually a lot higher. It used to be in the 50 to 60, right? So now we're doing better in educating people and recognizing um, the onset of a potential heart attack. With a stroke, it looks like there's about a 75%, 1 year, 75% survival rate. So what this means is we are surviving these illnesses. We need to financially support ourselves while we're recovering and surviving from some of these major illnesses. So now, if we talk about choosing the right policy, a big part of it really is not just cost, but the benefits to those policies. So you can get something that just gives you basic coverage, right? So basic coverage usually is 4 conditions: heart attack, cancer, stroke, and it could be the bypass one. Um, most basic policies will cover you for those 4 basic conditions. If you pay just a little bit more, and it's really just a little bit more, you get about 26 in there. And that's why I always encourage people. Like, I don't offer the basic coverage because if you pay for that and you happen to get MS or whatever else it might be, you're going to kick yourself and you know what for not paying a little bit more for those other covered conditions. So, and then usually it's carrier and underwriting, right? And you have your preferences, Ryan. I have my preferences. Again, it all could be structure of the policy, the benefits that each one has. Some of it is also claims experience, right? The underwriting process. That's why you reach out to a licensed insurance advisor who'll be able to kind of guide you through the path. And Ryan and I are both licensed insurance advisors. So if you're looking for some information, if you'd like a quote, reach out to us because we'd be more than happy to walk you through that process. Is there anything else that we want to talk about today when it comes to critical illness insurance?
I think the biggest thing, and I think I mentioned this in the last podcast about when we walked you through, is the GoFundMe stats. This is where GoFundMe often takes its place, and know what actually goes. So if you start a GoFundMe, to name them, but if you do, they take a fairly large transaction fee to start off, and then also at the same time, right now there could be a big incident that happens, and suddenly, what happens is people are fighting over the the amount of money that's out there, right? People willing to donate to a GoFundMe. So major catastrophe happens. That's actually what happened years ago. Is that people are fighting tooth and nail to find funding for them, and I'm sure everybody has heard a story or seen something on Facebook to support a GoFundMe page because something's happened, and it's unfortunate because some people don't get anything, and it's one of those things, a conversation at the right time of talking about whether critical illness could have been something that helped, and that we wouldn't have to see GoFundMe pages really if people understood their full plan and what potentially could have. And that's part of our job. Is there's a lot of uncertainties in our job, but it's us trying to help people plan for anything that could happen and make them more aware of the things that are out there. So,
well, yeah, I mean, GoFundMe, it's a great program, but you don't control the benefit, right? So to your point, Ryan, like when you have your own coverage, it's similar to when we talk about group insurance coverage compared to your own coverage. You can control the amount of coverage, the type of product. Your employer, you don't want them to control it because they can change it. You can change employment and lose those benefits, right? So GoFundMe is the same thing. You might need $100,000. You can only raise 50. You're short. But if you need the 100 and you pay for the 100, you know that in the event that you were to make a claim, you're getting that 100. You can count on it, right? So you definitely want to have control over your financial life, your family's financial situation, you don't want to rely on society to potentially step up, because sometimes they do in great fashion, other times they don't, right? And you don't want to have that worry or that variable when you're dealing with a major recovery.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. So what I encourage people to do, again, is reach out to us, financial@tvhgroup.ca. That is our email address, tvhfinancial.ca, if you want to go to our website. And we do have some information there about insurances. Critical illness, I believe, is also one of the products that we talk about. There is a quoting section as well. So if you like a quote, you can run your own quotes. At the end of this episode, I'm going to put a bit of a survey just to ask if you have critical illness or not. We don't know who's answered those questions, so don't worry. We're not going to be reaching out to you if you say no, you don't have any. You're not going to get someone calling you to sell you critical illness. It's just really more for our own information, to see if it actually does work out to be about 25% of the listeners do and 75% don't, kind of like the Canadian stat right now. But yeah, we're going to be putting out another episode hopefully next week, Ryan. I think it's still a mystery at this point. But until the next one, thanks everyone for listening. Ryan, thanks for your time, and looking forward to our next episode. Take care.
Absolutely. Bye.
Why is it me? Why am I a guy? I still